the bride of death in the Appalachian hills. The mother who sensed her unborn children decaying within her body. This isn't tall tale material. This isn't campfire storytelling passed between generations in the mountains. This is the documented truth of Martha Jean Collier. A name that continues reverberating through Kentucky's eastern hollows where family lineages don't extend outward in straight lines. They twist inward like snakes consuming their own stories. The date was 1967. The location Harlan County, nestled deep within Appalachian territory, where coal dust blanketed everything like residue from a memorial fire. In this community, so isolated it wasn't marked on standard maps, the Collier family made their home. For 7 generations running, they'd occupied that same restricted valley, encircled by peaks that appeared crafted by nature specifically to exclude the outside world while cradling mysteries within. Martha Jean had reached 19 when she wed Thomas Ray Collier during that spring season. Their vows were exchanged in the weathered family chapel constructed by their great-great-grandfather back in 1891. 43 individuals witnessed the union. Every last one carried the Collier name. Each single person. The marriage photograph, currently preserved but deteriorating in Harlan County's historical archives, reveals a girl with sunken features and eyes appearing to gaze beyond the lens towards some unreachable horizon. Beside her poses Thomas Ray, her spouse, also her maternal cousin once removed. His father and her mother descended from identical grandparents, Benjamin and Ruth Collier, themselves united as first cousins. The community they inhabited comprised 11 buildings spaced along a waterway residence called Dead Run. The designation originated from an 1894 cholera epidemic claiming 27 souls within a 3-week period. Yet families remained planted there. The Colliers consistently remained. Dr. Robert Harrison, a medical professional who visited the Hollow during 1965 participating in a rural health program, documented observations that later proved essential evidence. He recorded, "Never have I observed such facial similarity throughout an entire population. Each child I assessed displayed identical distinctive jaw formation, similarly positioned eyes, identical membrane connections between second and third toes. When I questioned family connections, I received simple confirmation that everyone shared bloodlines reaching back to original settlers." Martha Jean developed in a 2-room dwelling alongside her parents, her 3 brothers and sisters, plus her grandmother who simultaneously served as her father's aunt. Newspaper pages dating from the 1940s covered the walls. Dirt floors received partial coverage from wooden planks. Winter months brought drafts through floor gaps that no fireplace could fully eliminate. Formal learning within the Hollow concluded at 6th grade level, taught by whichever family member possessed sufficient reading ability to guide children. Martha Jean acquired her alphabet from her uncle cousin, a man named Ezekiel who had achieved 8th grade before entering the mines at age 14. By community standards, Thomas Ray represented a suitable partner. He maintained regular mining employment, delivered his wages home intact, and retained all his teeth, an uncommon attribute among males his age in that environment. That multiple siblings hadn't survived early childhood remained undiscussed. That his sister entered the world without properly formed hands received explanation as divine intention. Their wedding night unfolded within the cabin Thomas Ray had constructed personally, harvesting timber from identical woods where his grandfather had gathered materials for his own marital residence. The structure listed somewhat leftward, as if the ground itself attempted shaking it off. Martha Jean conceived during their initial month of marriage. Within the Hollow, this garnered celebration as blessing, proof of fertility and family continuation. Female relatives assembled around her, dispensing wisdom transmitted through generations, treatments incorporating mountain-gathered roots and botanicals, invocations delivered in traditional patterns. Yet abnormality manifested from the beginning. By her 3rd month, Martha Jean started experiencing internal sensations differing from described typical pregnancy experiences, sudden unpredictable spasms, moments when her abdomen hardened completely before relaxing, continuous discomfort extending from her womb into her backbone. The birth attendant, Clara Collier, simultaneously Martha Jean's great-aunt and Thomas Ray's grandmother's sister, conducted examination using hands deformed by decades of delivering Collier infants. She maintained silence, yet her expression revealed something Martha Jean had never observed there before. Terror. During her 4th month, the odor commenced. Initially, Martha Jean assumed some creature had perished beneath the dwelling, maybe a raccoon or a possum seeking shelter from cold and failing to re-emerge. Yet the scent tracked her everywhere. It originated from her physical being, a cloying decomposition smell causing nausea whenever she reclined at night. The Hollow's women started avoiding her. They would divert their path when noticing her approach. Children received summons indoors during her passage. Even Thomas Ray relocated to the floor, incapable of tolerating the odor saturating their bedding. By the 5th month, Martha Jean could no longer maintain pretense that her internal situation represented normalcy. Fetal activity had ceased entirely. Where kicking and motion should have occurred, merely a heavy dead mass pressed against her organs. The stench amplified until it saturated every possession she owned, her garments, her hair, her flesh. She scoured herself raw with lye soap, yet nothing provided relief. Decomposition originated internally, seeping outward through skin pores like toxin hunting release. Dr. Harrison, maintaining occasional visits to the Hollow, received summons from Thomas Ray's father during late September. His journey required 4 hours by automobile, then 1 final mile traveling on foot down a passage barely accommodating single-person width. What he encountered would disturb him permanently until his own death. Within private journals discovered after his 1989 passing, Harrison recorded, "The odor reached me 50 yards before the cabin. Throughout my career I've treated combat wounds, gangrenous infections, and decaying corpses, yet nothing prepared me for what I witnessed." The young woman, essentially still a child, rested on a straw bed, her stomach distended grotesquely. When I positioned my stethoscope against her abdomen, I detected no fetal heartbeat, merely absence. The unborn child had been deceased for minimum 6 weeks, potentially longer, and was putrefying internally. Harrison pleaded with Martha Jean to accompany him to the Harlan Hospital, located 28 miles distant. He explained that necrotic tissue within her body was contaminating her bloodstream, that fatality would result unless the pregnancy received immediate termination. Martha Jean declined. The family refused. The Hollow maintained its traditions, its personal convictions. Removing a child, even a deceased one, was considered homicide. Interfering with divine design was unimaginable. Beneath these articulated justifications rested something deeper, something more disturbing that Harrison could perceive yet couldn't verbalize. A resigned acceptance, as though they'd witnessed this previously, as though they anticipated it. Thomas Ray remained seated in the cabin corner, his expression vacant, offering nothing verbal. His mother, simultaneously his father's niece, positioned her hand on Martha Jean's forehead and recited devotions in a dialect Harrison couldn't fully comprehend, a mountain language appearing to predate contemporary English. The physician left medications targeting infection and discomfort, recognizing their insufficiency. He provided his contact details, imploring them to reach out if circumstances deteriorated. He understood they wouldn't. The Hollow contained no telephone service. The nearest available phone resided at the mining company office 11 miles distant. During Harrison's uphill trek that evening, he passed a modest burial ground concealed among timber. Most graves displayed simple wooden markers, identities, and dates carved roughly into wood. Numerous belonged to youngsters, numerous carried the Collier surname, and numerous, far too numerous, displayed death dates within days or weeks after birth. One marker seized his focus. It read, "Infant Collier, born and died, August 1952. Sister-daughter of Maggie Collier." Sister-daughter. The hyphenated designation unsettled him. He grasped its meaning instantly. Returning to the cabin, Martha Jean persevered. Agony became her perpetual companion, spreading through her pelvis and lower spine in surges leaving her breathless. Fever fluctuated, intensifying nocturnally until she trembled with cold regardless of blankets piled atop her. The women gradually returned, reluctantly. They delivered broths and herbal preparations, though Martha Jean retained minimal nourishment. They maintained attendance in rotation, preserving the vigil demanded by mountain tradition. They chanted hymns in voices eroded by difficult existence and more difficult bereavements. Clara, the birth attendant, assessed her again during early October. Her expression remained unrevealing, Yet she communicated something to Thomas Ray's mother that Martha Jean couldn't overhear. Both women glanced toward the entrance, toward the timber beyond, toward the family burial ground on the slope. That evening, Martha Jean perceived something change internally. Not movement, but rearrangement, as if the dead mass within her womb was settling, crumbling inward. The pain that followed exceeded anything previously experienced, a ripping sensation deep within her core causing screaming until her voice failed. Thomas Ray ran summoning Clara. By their return, Martha Jean had lost consciousness, her system too depleted maintaining awareness. Her pulse flickered weakly at her neck. Her complexion had acquired a grayish tint suggesting already past. Clara prepared botanicals she'd vowed never again to utilize. Treatments originating from previous homeland, from eras preceding physicians, from knowledge transferred through women who had confronted identical horror throughout earlier centuries. She steeped them in water from Dead Run Creek, fluid carrying flavors of metal and rock. When Martha Jean awakened, Clara made her consume the bitter preparation. "This will deliver it," the elderly woman stated. "Regardless of outcome, this will deliver it." Uterine contractions started 36 hours following Clara's administration of the herbs. They resembled nothing of typical childbirth, according to attending women. They manifested in irregular groupings, violent seizures arching Martha Jean's spine away from the mattress, leaving her too depleted even to vocalize. The odor became intolerable. Thomas Ray received direction to wait outside. Additional men withdrew to the clearing's far edge. Only females stayed, features covered with vinegar-soaked fabric, eyes watering from the stench. For 2 complete days and nights, Martha Jean struggled to expel what was already forfeited. The cabin transformed into a chamber of misery, illuminated by oil lamps casting dancing shadows across newspaper-covered walls. Outside, November rain fell heavily, converting ground to mud and the creek to thundering flood. On the 3rd day, something emerged. Clara received it in fabrics prepared specifically for this purpose. No one verbalized. The birth attendant's hands, which had delivered hundreds of infants across 40 years, quivered as she wrapped the miniature form. What emerged barely qualified as recognizable human. Decomposition had advanced so extensively that tissue had liquefied, skeletal elements had separated. Yet even in this condition, amid this atrocity, specific characteristics were apparent to Clara's trained vision. Characteristics causing her to shut her eyes and mouth supplication to a deity she no longer felt confident was attending. The infant had been developing abnormally. The cranium was misshapen, collapsed unilaterally. The spinal column curved at an impossible orientation, and there, where the tiny thoracic cavity had been, Clara perceived what she had dreaded discovering. A malformed heart, chambers combined in a configuration incompatible with survival. She had witnessed this previously, twice across her lengthy practice, both instances involving collier newborns. Both situations when parents shared excessive blood relation, when family lineage had curved back upon itself once too frequently. Yet Martha Jean's suffering hadn't concluded. 1 hour following initial delivery, contractions intensified once more. The women regarded one another with confusion and mounting terror. Clara examined Martha Jean again, her complexion losing color. "There's another," she murmured. "Twins." Martha Jean had been carrying 2 infants, neither having persisted beyond month 4. The second fetus was smaller, more extensively decomposed. When it ultimately emerged, it barely remained sufficiently intact to classify as human. This one displayed even more extreme abnormalities. The head was grotesquely enlarged, filled with liquid where brain matter should have formed. The limbs were abbreviated, contorted. Clara wrapped it swiftly, not wanting other women to observe, not wanting Martha Jean to witness upon regaining consciousness. Outside, Thomas Ray occupied the porch steps, rainfall saturating his garments, smoking cigarettes rolled from his grandfather's cultivated tobacco. He understood without verbal communication that the infants were lost. He understood, though no one had spoken it aloud, the reason for their deaths. He understood because his personal mother had lost 3 babies identically, because his grandmother had lost 5. Because the Collier lineage had been losing infants to the identical affliction across generations. They interred the twins at daybreak in the family cemetery within a single modest coffin Thomas Ray had constructed during nighttime hours. No names were carved upon the wooden marker. Simply a date. November 14, 1967. Simply a word. Twins. 7 individuals attended the burial. All Colliers. No prayers were uttered. What prayers remained for infants who never possessed opportunity? Whose destiny was determined by generations of decisions made by people long deceased. By isolation enforced through mountains and poverty and dignity. Martha Jean didn't attend. She stayed within the cabin, hemorrhaging gradually, infection disseminating through her system despite Clara's botanicals and Dr. Harrison's medications. Fever increased daily. She drifted between consciousness and oblivion, sometimes crying for her mother, sometimes for her infants, sometimes for death. During her coherent periods, she questioned Clara about something the midwife had been fearing. Why did they perish? Clara could have fabricated explanation. She could have attributed events to divine will or misfortune or any number of convenient falsehoods. Yet exhaustion had claimed her. Profound exhaustion from witnessing this repetition endlessly. Exhaustion from participating in suffering. Because your husband shares your bloodline, Clara stated quietly. Because his father and your mother are excessively related. Because we've been intermarrying for so extended duration that our offspring emerge damaged. If you're observing this and thinking intervention should have occurred, someone ought to have spoken openly. Someone ought to have protected these infants. Leave a comment expressing exactly that. Voice it clearly. Say, someone should have stopped this because your assessment is accurate. The quiet following was disturbed exclusively by rainfall against the metal roofing. Martha Jean shut her eyes. A solitary tear tracked down her sunken cheek. Dr. Robert Harris returned to the Hollow 3 weeks following the twins' interment. He had been attempting to obtain authorization conducting medical examination of the community, documenting what he theorized was occurring. The state health department had hesitated, referencing privacy considerations and difficulties engaging secluded populations. Yet Harrison remained determined. He had contacted associates at University of Kentucky Medical School. He had reached out to geneticists just beginning comprehending hereditary disease mechanisms. He had compiled death records from Harlan County spanning 70 years. What he uncovered was astonishing. Among the Collier family, infant death rates measured 4 times above national averages. Congenital abnormalities occurred at rates 12 times exceeding general population statistics. Stillbirths appeared so routinely they barely received documentation, and the pattern remained consistent across numerous generations, intensifying with each successive intermarriage cycle. When Harrison arrived at the Hollow during December 1967, he discovered Martha Jean barely maintaining existence. Infection had spread to her kidneys. Her temperature remained at 104 degrees. Her skin displayed yellow discoloration indicating liver involvement. He made determination without seeking family approval. He transported Martha Jean to his vehicle personally, disregarding Thomas Ray's objections, disregarding the assembled relatives attempting obstructing his route. He drove her to Harlan County Hospital, where she would spend the subsequent 6 weeks fighting for survival. The medical documentation from that admission, obtained decades afterward through public records requests by medical historians, reveals grim circumstances. Martha Jean required 3 operations removing dead tissue from her uterus. She received 14 blood transfusions. She received treatment for bloodstream infection, kidney dysfunction, and liver damage. She survived, yet at significant cost. The surgeries rendered her permanently incapable of future childbearing. At 19 years old, her reproductive years concluded within a hospital room smelling of antiseptic and mortality. During Martha Jean's recovery period, Dr. Harrison conducted his investigation. He interviewed every adult within the Hollow willing to communicate. He examined youngsters, collected blood specimens, documented physical variations. He constructed family trees appearing more like tangled webs than organized lineages. The Collier family, he discovered, originated from 3 brothers and 2 sisters who had established the Hollow in 1847. During initial 2 generations, they had married outside the family, bringing spouses from neighboring communities. Yet as years progressed, as roads deteriorated and settlement became increasingly secluded, marriages turned inward. By 1900, every union within the hollow occurred between cousins of varying degrees. By 1930, the genetic reservoir had contracted so dramatically that everyone shared DNA at levels typically observed exclusively between siblings or parents and offspring. By 1967, when Martha Jean wed Thomas Ray, they shared relation through 6 different ancestral pathways. The consequences appeared everywhere. Harrison examined cleft palates, club feet, cardiac abnormalities, cognitive impairments, reduced longevity. The community had normalized these conditions, accepted them as divine intention or simple misfortune. They lacked framework understanding that they themselves constructed their genetic disaster. Harrison's research never achieved publication in significant medical journals. The information proved too delicate, the ethical considerations too complicated. Yet it circulated among geneticists and public health professionals, becoming an unofficial case study regarding risks of extended genetic seclusion. Meanwhile, Martha Jean returned to the hollow during January 1968. She weighed 30 pounds less, scarred internally and externally, fundamentally transformed. Thomas Ray greeted her at the cabin entrance, awkward and uncertain. They coexisted for 3 additional months before she departed him, walking from the hollow carrying merely the garments on her back and a small bag of possessions. She never returned, never glanced backward, never discussed what had occurred in any detail with anyone beyond that valley. Yet Dr. Harrison maintained contact with her across the subsequent 20 years. Within their conversations preserved among his documents, Martha Jean spoke regarding the hollow's isolation, not simply geographic, but psychological. How questioning family traditions was unimaginable. How identical surnames on every mailbox created confinement more absolute than any physical walls. How poverty and dignity combined, keeping individuals trapped in damaging cycles. She spoke regarding other women, those who had endured similar losses and maintained silence, who held themselves responsible, who accepted their infants' deaths as divine punishment rather than genetic inevitability. She counted 11 women within just her mother's generation who had lost pregnancies as she had, whose bodies had become tombs for infants who could never survive. And she spoke regarding the hospital moment when a young nurse, unaware of Martha Jean's background, inquired whether she planned additional children. Martha Jean had laughed, a sound without humor. "I cannot," she stated. "And even if I could, I wouldn't. Not there. Not with him. I refuse allowing my body to become burial ground again." The Collier family hollow exists currently, though substantially diminished. Only 3 families continue residing there permanently, elderly relatives refusing departure when mines closed during the 1980s and most residents dispersed seeking employment elsewhere. Census records classify it uninhabited. The county considers it abandoned settlement. Yet if you know the old routes, those absent from GPS mapping, you can still discover it nestled within its valley like a secret the mountains hesitate surrendering. Martha Jean Collier lived her remaining years in Louisville, Kentucky. She worked as a custodian in an office building, employment demanding nothing beyond her physical effort while providing the anonymity she desired. She never remarried, never bore children, though later medical opinions suggested that with contemporary intervention, pregnancy might have been achievable. She died during 2003 at age 55 from ovarian cancer. The obituary listed no surviving relatives. No one from the hollow attended her funeral. Yet her story, preserved within Dr. Harrison's documents and within medical literature addressing genetic isolation, became a foundational case for understanding consequences of sustained intermarriage. The Collier Hollow, though never named directly in published research, stands as evidence of what occurs when families become excessively closed, when isolation becomes disaster. The cemetery on the hillside currently contains more than 300 graves. Approximately 40% represent children who died before their 5th birthday. The wooden crosses have weathered and collapsed. Most names now unreadable. Yet county death records preserve what timber could not, a pattern of loss extending across 7 generations. Of infants born too damaged for survival. Of mothers who endured what Martha Jean endured, possessing no escape route. Modern geneticists estimate that sustained first-cousin marriage elevates recessive genetic disorder risk by approximately 50%. When this pattern continues across multiple generations, when the genetic reservoir contracts to extended family dimensions, the risk multiplies exponentially. What was 50% becomes 70, then 90, then approaches certainty. The Collier family was not unique. Throughout Appalachia, within secluded hollows and remote settlements, similar patterns developed. Some received documentation, most did not. The shame accompanying these outcomes, combined with geographic seclusion and cultural privacy, meant countless families suffered alone, believing themselves cursed or wicked, never comprehending the biological mechanism underlying their tragedy. In recent years, genetic testing and counseling has become more accessible, even within rural regions. Public health initiatives have begun addressing isolation's legacy and its consequences. Yet for families like the Colliers, for women like Martha Jean, such assistance arrived too late, or never arrived. The cabin where Martha Jean labored for 3 days still stands, barely. The roof has collapsed on one side. The porch has decayed away. The newspaper on walls has dissolved into pulp. Yet the small room where she suffered, where 2 infants died within her and finally emerged in horror, nearly killing her as well, that room remains. Local hikers occasionally discover the settlement accidentally. They photograph the abandoned buildings, post images online with captions regarding forgotten America and rural deterioration. They don't comprehend the stories contained within those walls. They don't comprehend Martha Jean or the 11 additional women within her mother's generation or the countless others before and after. They don't comprehend that they're standing in a location where bodies became prisons. Where love transformed into genetic catastrophe, where isolation enforced by mountains and poverty generated suffering echoing across generations. Martha Jean's story, preserved within medical archives and Dr. Harrison's documents, finally received broader exposure during 1998 when a documentary filmmaker included it within an Appalachian health project. Reactions divided. Some commended attention to concealed crisis. Others criticized portrayal of mountain communities as backward or primitive. Yet Martha Jean herself, during one of her final interviews preceding her death, had expressed clearly how she wished her story understood. "I don't desire pity," she stated. "I desire people to comprehend that what happened to me occurs when families fold inward. When isolation becomes entrapment, when poverty and dignity prevent individuals seeking assistance. My infants died because of decisions made by people 100 years preceding my birth. I don't wish any woman to ever experience what I experienced, to smell what I smelled, to recognize that death is developing within her and she possesses no means preventing it." Yet if you've watched until this narrative's conclusion, if you've accompanied Martha Jean through her darkest moments, you comprehend why these histories demand telling. Verify whether you've subscribed to this channel because these represent the stories mainstream history overlooks. The human costs of isolation and closed communities deserving remembrance and understanding. Leave a comment stating, "I watched until completion so I can recognize you." So I can recognize who genuinely values these concealed histories that shaped American communities in ways we're only beginning comprehending. If this narrative affected you, if it prompted reflection regarding invisible suffering occurring within forgotten places, activate the like button. Share this video with someone needing understanding that behind every statistic regarding rural health, behind every number addressing genetic disease, actual individuals like Martha Jean exist who endured what no person should ever endure. The hollow where Martha Jean suffered continues existing, silent among its mountains. The cemetery still contains its secrets. And somewhere in Louisville, within an unmarked grave, rests a woman who survived death developing inside her. Who walked away from everything she recognized, who refused allowing her story to perish alongside her. This represents isolation's legacy. This represents genetic folding's cost. This represents what occurs when families become excessively closed and the external world seems impossibly distant. This represents the story of Death's Bride in Appalachia. The woman who sensed her infants decaying within her womb and who survived to speak truth that no one wanted hearing.